Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Larry. This is a wonderful turnout. My name is Josie. I work over at the library in the adult services area, and I am part of the team that brings programming to our adult population here at Longmont. A few things I want to say. So if you need to use the restroom or you need to get a drink, there's a water fountain and restrooms out this door and then to your left, kind of around the curve. We'd like to thank the Friends of the Longmont Library for supporting all of our programming that we have at the library. A membership is only $15 a year, which is pretty cheap, and it's a great way to support the library in your community. And I'm not going to talk a lot because nobody came here to hear me. So let's welcome Longmonter, Michael Witmore.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I've been a Longmonter for 1 year, and I have been in this room for a city council meeting, but I really never expected to find myself in the city council chamber talking about the future of digital media. So I'm grateful to you for coming, and thank you, Josie, for inviting me. I'll apologize in advance because I have a little bit of a scratchy throat. I brought up some water. Should be fine. I thought I would talk for about 45 minutes, and then we could open it up for questions. I do have slides, which you'll be able to see at the monitors. I would like to see them too. So from time to time, as I'm talking, you may see me turning back. And if I can't make the slides advance and see them at the same time, I might go back here and pretend to be the mayor for a while. But my name is Michael Witmore. I used to be a professor. I taught at Carnegie Mellon for 9 years. I taught at the University of Wisconsin for 3 years. I was a Shakespeare professor, so I taught classes on comedies, histories, and tragedies. I received a PhD from the University of California, Berkeley, in rhetoric, which is kind of like a PhD in talk. But it is the oldest actual language art, and there were no English majors in the Renaissance. There were people who studied rhetoric, so it was a good preparation for me when I did eventually go to lead a place called the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C. And the Folger is right next to the U.S. Supreme Court on Capitol Hill. It's almost 100 years old, beautiful marble building on the outside. And then on the inside, it has a Tudor Stuart interior. So it looks a little bit like Hogwarts. There's a great hall, there's a gorgeous library reading room, and there's a Tudor theater. So it also has the single largest collection of Shakespeare materials in the world, by far. So these would be books and manuscripts that were produced between 1470 and roughly 1700. The collection is much larger than Shakespeare. Shakespeare's is just a tiny fraction of what is in that collection. But I led the Folger for 13 years through a renovation, which took 4 years, and after $80 million and a lot of headaches, we reopened in June to the public with a new public wing and exhibition spaces and gardens, all inserted under the historic building. At which point I was tired and I retired, and I was looking for the next wonderful place to live my life, and I chose Longmont. My parents, who are here tonight, have lived in the area since 1989, and my girlfriend Sarah lives in Longmont. So I've had a chance to enjoy this town, and it's been a great move for me. So I'm really also flattered to just be able to introduce myself and what I do to people who love libraries. And I assume that's you. Let's begin. I'm going to speak today about something called digital vellum. And those two words are not words you would use together. Vellum, as I will describe, is a material for creating manuscripts that can then be read years, centuries after they were created. And I'm actually going to show you some examples of a vellum manuscript. Digital is digital media, which is created at unbelievable rates on our phones and our cameras. We are throwing off digital files faster than we can store them. So we're going to be talking about how the transition from a very old medium, which was animal skins that we used to write information on, all the way to the period that we live in now, where digital media is pervasive, and almost all of the information we encounter is coming mediated through digital technology. So digital and Vellum. We'll talk about both of them. Can everybody hear me? Great. So I wanted to start out with just a brief illustration and a consideration of how it is that we know anything about the past. The Elizabethan period, which is the one that Shakespeare was a part of, and the period that I used to study and write books about almost 450 years ago, is available to us through paintings, through books, through manuscripts. But if you widen the lens and ask yourself, how is it that we know about the past? We have a couple of choices. We have artifacts like paintings. We have archaeological remains. We have pottery, textiles, tools, roads, all of those physical remainders that give us a clue about what people were thinking and doing centuries ago. We also have oral traditions. So storytelling, we have riddles, we have proverbs, we have songs, we have great epics like the Iliad and the Odyssey that were written in verse so that they could be memorized and transmitted over centuries. The only reason why we even have those stories is because people could actually just remember them. And then finally, documents. So books, manuscripts, diaries, notes, correspondence, administrative records. You can imagine in the days when we didn't have the internet, we had, if you're old enough to remember, filing cabinets. They were full of paper. And that's where we got our information. Well, in the age of Elizabeth, they also had filing cabinets, but they weren't for vertical files, they were for rolled documents. And I want to show you one of those soon, but I just wanted to add to this, now that much of the information that we get is produced digitally, we also have file formats. And these are the names on the screen of different types of files that you probably use, and they're the formats that communicate and preserve digital information. So what's the difference between storing information physically and storing it digitally? I want to start out with a manuscript. So vellum is a word that we use to describe a type of material. It's an animal skin. So an animal is killed, the skin is processed, it's treated with uric acid, it's smoothed over, and then a scribe will write on that parchment. So vellum can be made out of many different types of animals, but in the Elizabethan period, it was cow, goat, or sheep. England pretty much used those animals. So this is an example of an Elizabethan manuscript. Manuscript means something that was written by hand, as opposed to something that was printed. This one is a tall manuscript. You can see that's not Queen Elizabeth in shadow. That is an average person of average height, and the manuscript that we're looking at is a record from the court of Queen Elizabeth I. This is one of almost a dozen gift rolls that are at the Folger Shakespeare Library. So this is a record of the gifts that Queen Elizabeth gave to the members of her court on New Year's Day. And on one side are the gifts that she gave, and on the other side are the gifts that she got. So we would call this two things. It's an administrative record because it tells us who got what, and it's very specific. But it also is a record of standing, of who's important enough to get something. And it starts with the earls and goes down in social rank from there. So this really is kind of like an X-ray of who matters in Elizabeth's world. And I did want to just give you a taste of what the manuscript is like. This was created by a scribe who was writing in something we call secretary hand. So that handwriting is actually hard to read. You can learn to read it. I transcribed a couple of the sentences at the top, which are about the Queen giving certain people guilt She gives them probably plate of a valuable metal. And then at the top, you see, Elizabeth was one of the best educated monarchs in Europe when she was alive and reigning, and she was very confident, and you can see her signature right there. Elizabeth I, Regina, is how she would sign it. So, vellum manuscripts are very durable. The manuscript I just showed you is in pretty good shape. It's well over 400 years old. But we have vellum manuscripts with things like sacred texts that have lasted over 1,000 years. It is a stable material if you place it somewhere with constant humidity, very low variance in humidity, and keep the temperature within a certain band. So there are libraries and archives all over the world that are designed to take care of these materials. And if you added it all up, billions and billions of dollars have been spent to take care of rare books and manuscripts. The Folger Shakespeare Library is one such place. There's a picture here of one of the long stacks. The stacks are a city block long, and there are 2 vaults that are underground, housing 20,000 linear feet of rare books and manuscripts. And there's a beautiful reading room so that when the manuscript comes up from underground, someone can sit down and read it. So think of all of that as a support system for memory. We want to remember things that have happened in the past. The only way we can do that is for someone to tell us who was there, and there aren't any of those people, or we can use documents. And these rare book libraries are places where we take care of and transmit knowledge. They're the kind of a link in a chain that allows us to know things over time. And that's something I want to talk about today, because that chain of passing knowledge and culture and songs and stories is in danger of being broken because of our reliance on digital media. That's what we're going to talk about. So let's just talk a little bit about what it takes to store something physically, and also what the properties are of physical storage. The first thing to notice is that physical objects like manuscripts are self-powered. You don't have to plug them in. So when you want to store one, you put it on a shelf and you leave it there. As long as the environment is at a constant temperature and the variances in humidity are low, it's stored. You do have to pay for that, however. Second, these objects are themselves slow to change over time, and they often contain languages that are slow to change over time. We're going to see a contrast when we start talking about digital file formats. But the fact that we can recognize the writing on a manuscript that's over 400 years old tells us in part that English as a language has changed rather slowly compared to things like digital files. And of course, the vellum itself is slow to degrade. I mean, some funny things can happen if you make a book the wrong way. The animal skin always wants to bend back to the way the animal was, so you have to make sure that back-to-back faces and inward faces so that your book doesn't flip like that. Third, these are, we would use this phrase, they're intentional objects, that someone created it and they thought about it. Think about what it takes to get that animal killed, to go through the months of curing and creating that manuscript, and then you've got to have an educated person who can read and write, usually in Latin, sometimes in English, with a quill pen, and they need to record something on that manuscript. You're not writing like Post-it notes. You're writing something that you've thought about. And the difficulty of creating that memory object, that's what I'll call it, but it's a manuscript. The difficulty of it is what guarantees that what's in it is probably important. And that's an interesting paradox. the harder it is to create an object, probably the more important it is that you're creating it. Finally, to survive, these objects have to be housed in well-funded institutions. So think about sacred texts, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Many of those manuscripts are in the Vatican Library. Many of them were copied by monks in monasteries that were specifically dedicated to copying those manuscripts. So they had to know that the monastery would be around 100 years from now, 200 years from now, that the abbot who said to the monk, go copy this manuscript, that there would be another abbot 5 generations from now who had trained other monks to read the Latin and copy it again. That is a wealthy institution. What we call, historians call Vatican bureaucracy, was a well-funded network of monasteries and churches who could afford to copy, create, and remember these manuscripts. So it's important to remember this. You don't just need the stable medium. You're going to need some other things too. You're going to need people who care about what's on that vellum. And you're going to need an institution that survives for centuries. How many institutions can we count that are around for centuries? There are a couple of military divisions that have been around for over 500 years. The Vatican has been around for more than 500 years, and there's some libraries that have been around for more than 500 years. Governments, less stable. Companies, even less stable. So now let's think about digital media. When President Obama left office, like many presidents, he started plans for his presidential library, and a presidential library contains the records of a president's administration. Because of when Obama was alive and was president, 90% of the materials in that collection of over 1 billion digital documents, 90% of those files are born digital. There is no paper backup. So the only way we will ever know what is in those files is if someone copies them, and they have to make a digital copy. Now things start to get a little more complicated. If I have Vellum administrative records or even good paper, I can put them in a research library and they'll be there for a couple centuries. If I have a digital file, if everything we did in the government was on email, we have to figure out how to preserve that if we want to understand what happened. So we're at an interesting moment where we will probably know 50 years from now, possibly, more about the court of Queen Elizabeth than we will about the administration under Obama. And that's because of the difference in the types of records. So this is the part of my talk where it gets worse. I'm going to start describing how hard it is to take care of digital records. Make sure I'm on the right slide. So let's ask ourselves what's on your phone, what's on your laptop. Where is all that data living? Well, it lives on a magnetic drive or a solid state drive in your computer, but often you back up your data to a service. Google, Amazon Web Services. What are those things? They call it a cloud. It's a data center. And to save the data, you've got to put it on a magnetic drive or a solid state drive, and that drive will wear out in 5 years. Because the O's and 1's, the magnetic charges that are your data, will rot and degrade on those mediums. And so someone has to be paid, this gentleman on the Amazon team, has to go in and migrate all of the data from one drive to the next. That has to be done every 5 to 6 years for everything. There's a really cool place in Boulder called the Media Archaeology Lab at CU Boulder. You can make an appointment. I think you can just walk in. It's on campus. But it's one of the greatest collections of old computers I've ever seen. And the folks who run it are wonderful. You can walk in there and you can see a working Apple Lisa computer that they can actually boot up. But you can see a PDP-11 over there. I wanted to show this because my father's here and he used to work for DEC and probably sold one of those when they were made. More than one. But these are computers that at the time felt like the future. But now they're the past. And if you created a file, if those of you, I'm looking at the audience, many of you know what a floppy disk looks like. Just pause here. How many of you have floppy disks still? Okay, can you run them? Way to go. This is an important point. Even in a single lifetime, we are experiencing the inability to preserve data. Just one lifetime. And let's also talk about these household names. Some of you, I'm sure many of you in this room will recognize these logos. My girlfriend Sarah is a millennial, so she looks at these and recognizes, I think, one of them.
Navigator, 11 years old.
There you go. I mean, I don't say this to make you feel old or young. I'm just saying that the average lifespan of a tech company is 30 years or less, and that's actually not the average. It's much lower. It's very hard for a commercial entity like a tech company to stick around. But if they disappear and you have data that was formed, have any of you created a Lotus 123 spreadsheet or Word perfect document? Yes. Right. Great. So Google has created an emulation module that will allow you to take that file. It digitally reconstructs the hardware that was underneath it, and you can take your file and read it. However, if they flip the switch on that simulation, they're breaking copyright law because that file format is copyrighted and the company that owns it still owns it even if it's defunct and bankrupt. Now let's move to a more positive line of thinking. So why digital and Vellum? So clearly, the only data storage technique that we have that has been tested and that works for over 100 years, over 200 years, over 500 years is physical storage in natural languages. By natural, I mean not computer. It could be Latin, it could be English, it could be whatever. That's the only thing that we have that has a track record. What we need is a digital version of storage that behaves like Vellum, that has some of those properties. You remember we talked about being self-powered, being highly intentional, being housed in institutions that last. We need to figure out how to map the properties of these old animal skins in these very interesting and fascinating scrolls books and figure out how to make that happen in the digital world. And to do that, I've partnered, partnered is not the right word, I follow a friend of mine who was on the Folger board. His name is Vint Cerf. Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn invented the TCP/IP protocol, which is the backbone of the internet. So he can legitimately claim to be one of the fathers of the internet. And Vint does say that Al Gore helped a lot. He's got a great job title, Chief Internet Evangelist at Google. But about 10 years ago, Vint started to talk about the ways in which we might be approaching a digital dark age. That is the cliff that we will go over once we stop sustaining digital media, including your WordPerfect files and all this other material that we're creating. So today, it is not possible to guarantee the storage of a digital file, even for a generation. You could ask Amazon to store it for you for 35, 50 years. They could take your money, but they might go bankrupt. You could hand it to Google. Google is now going to be broken apart by the federal government. They may not be Google 50 years from now. So it's not that there are people who aren't trying. There are many people who are trying. There are technologies, some of which I'll talk about tonight. There are data formats that are being stabilized by places like libraries so that your file will be readable by someone else, not just today or tomorrow, but 20, 30, 50 years from now. There is a lot of work happening in this area, but there's no total view of all the layered problems, from the bit level preservation to getting the hardware and the old machines preserved, to getting the software preserved, to preserving the file formats, and then dealing with the intellectual property issues, and finally, the non-persistence of the entities that take care of the data. That means bankruptcy. So that's a very layered problem, and that's why it hasn't been solved. But there may be ways of thinking about it based on technologies that have already worked, for example, Vellum, that could be helpful. 90% of the world's data was created in the last 2 years. It's staggering. Just pause on that one. That's a great thing to think about. Ancient Greece and ancient Rome. The Romans and the Greeks produced actually a lot of literature, a lot of ideas, a lot of science. Much of it was written on scrolls, which were then put in libraries, which then disappeared. The famous Library of Alexandria was burned, and with it, we lost most of the records from ancient Greece and Rome. We have probably 1% or less. But I say that to point out that 1% is a lot. Think about how much we know. The ideas that have been transmitted from those cultures, those are ideas that Thomas Jefferson read when he was thinking about how to write a constitution. Even if you saved 1%, that would be plenty. There is no way we can save 1% of the digital material we're creating. It is going to be an exponential fraction of that amount. But that might be enough. The question is, what do you save? Who decides what to save? And what message do we put in the bottle to the future to say, here's why we saved it? But we certainly can't and we shouldn't try to save all of it. It'll bankrupt the planet. The power requirements alone would be ridiculous. For those of you who like illustrations, here's an illustration of the access to information is on the y-axis. The x-axis is relative time. This is a diagram. This is not based on measurements. But if you thought of Queen Elizabeth's time being around the left-hand side, around 0, and 2100 being at around 1, you see, let's take our Vellum manuscript. It is accessible pretty consistently for 400 years. Then you see this spike, the blue dotted line, that's digital media. And digital media proliferates. You can make infinite copies. You can distribute them. So access goes way up. But then you hit the sustainability curve, and it starts to go down. These are your WordPerfect files. And then at a certain point, they have dipped below where the Vellum manuscript was that sits in a research library. So we're at that point where we're starting to realize that all of the material that we created digitally Even though we created an incredible explosion of accessibility, we doomed the data. So when you take the majority of human knowledge and culture, you put it in digital form to make it accessible, you've also just put it in a rowboat in a lifeboat that you know is leaky. And that's our problem. We know that it won't persist. We know that the data won't be readable. We know that we're going to not be able to remember things 50 years from now, 100 years from now, and if we're lucky, 500 years from now. But we should be preparing for a world where that's possible. Okay. What have we learned from the history of information transition? How could it help us? Well, first, preserving knowledge, preserving culture is not just a matter of tech. It's also the desire to remember certain things. You know, if I told you we could make an image of your phone and it would be openable just as you see it today, 500 years from now, everything on your phone, we have to ask ourselves, who in 500 years is going to want to see that? So it's not just the, I've got a contraption that will save the data, we're good. It's a more complicated problem. It's, what do I want to remember myself? And then what do I think people are going to want to remember? Right? Certain equations, definitely. I would say Shakespeare plays were a go. Certain types of music, certain types of records, certain things that teach us about important moments in history. But that's not a technical problem. That's a problem that those of us who are interested in the humanities think about, which is cultural memory. What is important to us? Why do we preserve it? Who is it for? We have to pause and ask those questions. People have to care about the content for it to be reproduced. And here, I want to just point to those hardworking monks in the scriptorium who believe that the Gospel of Mark that they're copying this year will still be true and important 300 years from now. The belief of that community translates into the care for the objects that transmit the memory. Without people who care, the memory doesn't persist. People don't take care of the manuscripts. But you have to have that. The more something is used, the better the odds that it will survive. This is a little bit harder to grasp, but many of the sacred texts that have lasted for over 1,000 years, they lasted because people wanted to write commentaries on them. And so you would see line by line, a manuscript with the scripture, and then you would see in smaller writing a commentary on each line of the scripture, interlineal commentary. We call that annotation. Well, the same thing is true when you react to digital media on Instagram. When you like something, when you repost it, when you comment on it, you're annotating it. But it's an important thing to remember. The more people interact with something, the more likely it is to stick around. When you're forced to be selective, you become intentional, and intentional objects last. I could take 1,000 pictures on my phone today and put them in the cloud, and I wouldn't be thinking about it. Odds are they're valuable because they're easy to make. But this gets back to that principle we were talking about earlier in my talk, where if it's hard to create a memory object like a manuscript, odds are you're going to think about what you put in it. Finally, you have to name the things that you save. So there's that bottle in Alice in Wonderland that says, "Drink me." That's an instruction to someone in the future about how to use that thing. And if I hand someone 500 years from now a disk that has data on it and say, have at it, I haven't helped them. I need to give them instructions. This data is in the form of a PDF file. A PDF file has the following structure. To create a PDF reader, you're going to want to do this, this, and this. And those instructions should not themselves be in a PDF file. No. I mean, you have to think about it from the standpoint of the person who's at the far end of history getting this little care package and saying, what do I do with that? And you can't put the instructions in a language they can't read. Those instructions should probably be visual. A little bit like that golden record that was sent up with Voyager, the satellite, which you all know, but which illustrates where we are in the solar system and some things about our scientific knowledge. Here's an answer that the Digital Vellum group is thinking about pursuing, and this will probably become a prototype next year. But we are looking to create several layers of this preservation ecology, and in doing this prototype, we want to force questions about where the gaps are in preservation. That's really probably the only way to figure it out. So we are aiming to commission 5D optical storage devices. They look a little bit like a hockey puck. But it's a way of arranging the molecules in a crystal that allows for dense storage of bits, which does not have to be plugged in. The crystal just sits there. So we can create a crystal storage structure, set it somewhere where it's not disturbed, and it will, the bits that are on it can be retrieved in the form they were put on it. We're hoping to do that at Carnegie Mellon next year. Second, to create virtual machines. So you remember those pictures of the old Apple IIs and beautiful old machines. You need a way to simulate that without having the actual hardware. So there's a professor at Carnegie Mellon named Satya Mahadev, who's the father of something called edge computing. And Satya has a protocol for creating a virtual machine if you give him the hardware and the software instruction set. So data goes on the hockey puck. We use Olive to create a virtual machine that can read the hockey puck. That's not the complete solution, but it's the beginning of one. We then have to figure out, of all the data we've got that we could put on hockey pucks, how should we label it? What's the drink me message on it? Now, on a prototype, you could do things like, we'll take the works of Beethoven and the works of Shakespeare and we'll put them on this storage device. But now think about that 90% of the world's data that's been created in the last 2 years. Is there anyone who could manually inspect all of that material? Is there any super librarian with a descriptive, we call it a descriptive protocol, a way of describing the objects that is comprehensive enough to name everything in that body of information? You know, apparently, Adam and Eve were supposed to have named the animals in the Garden of Eden. The animals kept those names for a long time. Well, when it comes to information, someone has to name it too. They have to say, this is a diary. This is a financial record. This is a stock quote. Who's going to do that? Finally, we're going to need to create something like a digital fiduciary, which is an organization that has kind of a legal obligation to preserve the data that they are given. And that fiduciary actually has to hold, and we're going to get in the stratosphere here for just 60 seconds, the intellectual property required to decode that file will be inaccessible if the company who created it is bankrupt or doesn't want you to have it. So we need to create a neutral entity in a nonprofit probably that could last more than 100 years that will hold the keys to that data. To do that, we need some legal infrastructure so that the person who takes the data says, I commit to furnishing this data in roughly the same form for this amount of time? So that's a legal set of questions. We will do that, and the project will unfold, and perhaps in 2 years I'll come back and give another talk for the public library and tell you these things worked and these things didn't. But I'm sure we're going to learn a lot. I think what's exciting to me about the project is that it takes its inspiration from 400 and 500-year-old objects, which I myself have studied and have worked hard to interpret for the public. It's really exciting to work with technologists who attack this problem as a technical problem, but most technologists have not read a 400-year-old manuscript. Many have, some have, but most of the time they haven't. And a key question to ask yourself is, what do you do with a 400-year-old record? What does a historian do? What kind of questions do you ask? The first folio of Shakespeare is a great example of a preservation exercise that went well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about first folios and then we'll be done. So the first folio of Shakespeare's plays was published in 1623. It contains 36 Shakespeare plays. 18 of those plays had never been published before. So had this book not been published, we wouldn't have The Winter's Tale, Julius Caesar, Macbeth. These are hugely important and powerful plays. But someone had to print them so we could remember them. And two friends of Shakespeare, Hemmings and Condell, who were both actors in his company, after Shakespeare died, he left them a little something in his will. They said, we are going to create a memorial to Shakespeare, our friend. We will get the license to print 36 plays, and we're going to put them in a big fancy book called a folio. A folio is a book that's about this size. It's expensive because you need big pieces of paper. Usually it's reserved for legal writings, religious writings, and history. But the first folio is the first book published in English that is in folio format, and it contains only stage plays. So just the existence of the book itself tells us that plays were becoming very important. In addition to picking a great storyteller, whose stories they knew would live for a long time, putting it in a stable physical format that people knew was important, spending the money to do it, which made it hard and intentional, they added what we call metadata, which is the description of what's in it. Now, they didn't think of that as metadata. They commissioned poems by people that they put in the beginning of the book to say, here's why we saved this guy's writing, because he's really good. And they even commissioned poems from Shakespeare's competitor, Ben Jonson, who praises Shakespeare in the opening pages of this book. So here are two views of some folio examples. On the top is what is now a very famous picture of Shakespeare. This is the title page of the book. And what was quite unusual about this title page is they chose to put a portrait of the writer on the title page. And then just to the left is Ben Jonson's poem, which says, here's a picture of Shakespeare. He did really look like this, but don't pay attention to the picture, because if you really want to understand this person, you should read the works. Because the words in this book are a picture of his mind, and they're a better picture than any engraving. Later, a few pages later, he says, Shakespeare wrote in ways that even the Greek and Romans couldn't. He's our best writer, and he's not for one age, he's for all time. So, if that's your drink me label on your data, it says this is really important. And by the way, if you're a word and a phrase and you get used in a Shakespeare play and you're printed in the first folio, the odds of your being repeated in the English language go way up. Because stories are like that bottle that crosses the ocean that has this contents, and then someone opens it up way later. And the magnificent and amazing thing about Shakespeare's plays is that generation after generation opens the bottle and they think, gosh, the note is addressed to me. Like, these plays are powerful. Shakespeare's still the most widely performed playwright on the planet. Below, I wanted to show you a picture of a newly discovered annotation on a first folio that is in the Free Library in Philadelphia. Now, first folios are important books. They're not super rare because there are 235 copies of this book known to survive. In some books you have only one. But an individual copy of the first folio sells for between $6 and $10 million at auction. It was discovered that this handwriting on the Philadelphia first folio, this is about 7 years ago, is the handwriting of John Milton, the author of Paradise Lost. And the folio that's in Philadelphia is a play-by-play of John Milton's reactions to Shakespeare. This whole thing was partly figured out at the Folger because we had Milton's annotations as well, and a scholar was looking, and they were using Twitter to share pictures, and boom, they got it. But the fact that someone took this care to annotate the book makes that first folio in Philadelphia vastly more valuable. It's priceless. And it ensures that that book will survive longer. Annotation confirms life on works. When I finished my work at the Folger, we added a new set of galleries, new gardens, a restaurant. We really opened it to the public, and we created a visible vault in which we displayed, and still display now for the first time, all 80 copies of the first folio. And we also have a printing press to show people how it was printed. But when you think about memory, you can think of a book on the shelf, which is important. That shelf in the visible vault at the Folger is temperature and humidity controlled to within an inch of its life. But you want people around it. You want a living memory of people who say, I care about this. I connect to these stories. When I'm 14 and I go out on the balcony, I feel like Juliet. When my best friend tells me my other friend is a liar, I'm Othello, and Iago is just whispering bad things to me. Like, everybody's going to face that at some point. But you've got to have people who want to remember it. So it was very gratifying to reopen the Folger and have the mayor come, and the King Charles wrote a letter saying, thank you, this is really great for our guy, Shakespeare. But there are people there. And that's really important. I would like to just emphasize the importance of having actual human connections, passing memories along. And then I want to contrast to this, which is one of the coldest bookshelves in the world. This is the Arctic Seed Vault in Svalbard, Norway. It's in the Arctic Circle. It doesn't consume a lot of power because 300 meters below the Earth's surface, they've saved seeds from species, plants that would be valuable to human beings, and they don't want them to disappear. And in a tiny little vault right next to it, they have data that is stored on a film that is purely mechanical. You don't have to plug these reels of data in to preserve them. It's called pickle film. But all of GitHub's code base is in there, as well as records from the National Archives of Mexico and Brazil. So that is a model of an institution that should stick around, that will have the right bookshelf. We probably will never visit this. I would love to visit this place, but I don't think I'm going to go there. But all of us, I think, face the question of what do I want to remember and what would I pass on? So I wanted to end on this. Here's some things that I've learned and that maybe would be useful to you. As you think about how to pass your memories on, first, you should choose what you save and remember that saving even 1% is huge. if you were to intentionally sit down, you could maybe even do it at random, but take something and then sit there and give it a name. Name it when you save it. This is a picture of me when I graduated from college. I'm the first member of my family to graduate from college. This is my father. This is my mother when we were there. This was an important moment for me. That's huge. 500 years from now, I guarantee you historians will be interested in that. Make redundant copies. There's a theory at Stanford called locks. Lots of copies keep stuff safe. L-O-C-K-S-S. Make a second copy, send it somewhere else. Put it in the glove box of your car. Just put it somewhere else. And finally, why not print it out? Sarah and I take lots of pictures, and I became famous in Longmont because I'm on her Facebook feed all the time. But we sometimes print the pictures out and make these books, which are valuable to us. They describe important moments in our lives, and the fact that we printed them out, and that's hard to do, you got to pay for it and you got to wait, tells us and other people this matters. So that's one. Two, if you can stand it, get a pen and a piece of paper and write it out. There's something about the act of collecting yourself and writing a paragraph about what you really think that is so valuable. And I do that myself sometimes. To illustrate this principle tonight, have brought all of my notebooks from the last 20 years. This is my 1%. And when I have a thought that I think is important, I don't know if it's important or not, I get out a pen, I try to collect myself, and I write it. And I've been doing it for 20 years. The notes for the books that I've written are here. Notes about my life are here. Notes about being director of the Folger are here. But I know these are valuable to me. And the reason why is because every time I pulled out a pen to write it down, it was because I wanted to take the time to do it. And hopefully we'll all be able to take that time. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for listening. And thank you for recognizing the word perfect in Netscape jokes. That was really good.
You want to do some questions?
Yeah, I think we could. What time? We probably have time for 4 or 5?
We've got plenty of time.
Oh, well, let's let her rip. Peggy, please.
I want you to use the mic so everybody can hear the question, please.
You said that you wanted to preserve Shakespeare.
Yes.
Shakespeare's already preserved. And so why the redundancy to digital?
Well, I'm a Shakespeare fanatic, so I want to make sure there are lots of copies. But I think your question is what else? We do need to make copies of other things. There are copies of Shakespeare on the Bitcoin blockchain, which is a pretty good bet because it's a highly capitalized, universally distributed technology. Not a bad idea, but very expensive. Very expensive. The cost of maintaining the blockchain, the cost of writing it on a current digital currency is high. Peggy, the question that I ask myself is, who should decide what else we save? You know, I've seen you have a bookshelf. There are things you love to read. Maybe we should ask individuals, consumers and users, like, if I had a button on my browser that could say, preserve this, and Google would save it for 100 years, then that puts the decision right in your hands. And I know that's something that Vint has tried to do. But I think that's a good example of putting curation and selection in the hands of people. And my bet would be on people. I mean, English professors around the world, maybe not as much now, but a lot of them would say, save Shakespeare, you know, save Milton, save Jane Austen.
You've already saved those.
But they're in books that are in thousands of libraries. So what else are we missing? A historian friend of mine, a wonderful social historian named Scott Sandage, I said, what would you save if you could save only one thing? And instantly he said, eBay. instantly. I said, why? He said, because it has pictures and descriptions given by people themselves, not a company, about things they want and things they are willing to trade. People will sell things that they won't even tell their family about. There's a lot of information there. And, that's really interesting. Ask a historian, what would you say? I'd save eBay. But that's very different from Shakespeare. You were next, I think.
Oh, sorry.
I've seen this happen in my own job when I was working. And there were digital records created, and we went from mainframe to internet. We would try to explain to management that at some point you have to start migrating this. And the attitude was, well, first of all, we don't have the money, and second, I'm not going to worry about it because I probably won't be here in 10 years.
That's right.
And I'm going to kick it down the road.
Yeah.
So what do you do about those kinds of situations?
Well, you named two problems. There's no incentive structure when there's, we save data to create access for people who aren't alive yet. It's still an access question. It's just about people who are not around yet. So who's their advocate? You need an artificial advocate for them. And then second, there's no business model that prioritizes preservation. Most digital media companies, and I know there's some folks in this room who are creating successful digital media companies, you don't add that cost. So I would say I don't have an answer for you, but I think we have a good description of the problem.
I've got a couple of particular things you talked about that I'm interested in. One is the metadata thing.
Yes.
I'm the executor of my parents' wills.
Mm-hmm.
I am currently excavating their stuff. And there's
Okay.
so many really interesting things that I have no idea where they're from. I don't know who these people are in the pictures.
Yeah.
I don't know why they had things. And I found, a lot of kind of junk and then something really interesting or valuable or important to my family mixed in with it. So I just want to emphasize. Oh, sorry. So what I am going to emphasize is I don't have the metadata you're talking about
Right.
for so much of my family's heritage.
Yes.
My mother's from the Philippines, so a lot of records were destroyed during World War
Yes.
II. And my father was from a farm family in Iowa, nothing prominent. So a lot of their records.
Their time wasn't spent annotating their pictures.
Right,
and-
they were busy. I found a scrapbook of my father's elementary school Valentines that
Oh
he
my
received
gosh.
when he was
Jeez,
six.
that's
in sixth grade.
amazing.
And I don't know who most of those people are that signed them. So it's
There
hard to
may
do.
be an answer to that.
I mean, some of it I've been able to find out
Yeah,
online.
I think you should do it yourself.
Yeah, I'm doing as
think
much
you
as I
should do it
can,
as much as yourself.
and Google and AI and Google Lens have all been extremely valuable for me to at least track
Yeah.
down where something's from or what it is.
And I think AI agents, which I was gesturing toward,
Right.
are going to have the ability, not right now, but to make massive comparisons with facial data, with
Mm-hmm.
census, that will automate, and you could get a better description.
Yeah.
But for now, it should be you.
Yeah, and it will be a lot of it, and my sister. But the thing is that when you're faced with something like that, you've got all of these records, all these archives, all these photographs.
No.
I have so many photographs that I need to go through, but putting everybody's names on them, it's like it's one of those things that's a huge investment of time. And
Do 1%.
yeah, I'm going to go through. I'm going to take that. I'm taking that advice. But I was just wondering if you had any advice as far as how to, besides 1%, but how to go about collecting that.
The Argentinian writer Borges wrote beautiful short stories about libraries being labyrinths. And having worked in one for 13 years, it really struck me that once you enter the labyrinth, you're there forever. But your little piece of string is a reasonable expectation, and you can have one, which is, I'm going to save 1% of what I see. I'm going to make the best guess I can. And through history has shown us that that's often more than enough. Yes?
At the beginning of your talk, you were talking, reminded me right away of a project management. And
I love your question. Keep going.
myself as an engineer.
He said, your talk reminds me of project management. And
Yes, closer.
yeah,
Okay.
eat the mic.
I'll try again. So, as an engineer and a former project manager, I understand the problem, the way you presented the challenge and the planning. And it's not only the technical part of it, but the financial part of it.
Yeah.
In combating global warming, there are those two efforts in project management and financial management, particularly in London, Abu Dhabi, and Singapore. So my question is there an effort similar to that? Is there an effort similar to creating a fast railroad, or even the railroad planning that is happening here
Yeah.
in the Front Range?
Well, I appreciate your comment, and actually, very few people have reacted to a talk I've given and said it sounds like project management. So I actually like that, because I hope it means that I've succeeded in presenting to you a problem that an engineer could immediately start thinking about. And as someone who was trained to read old manuscripts and think about poetry and stories and theater, one of the challenges for people who talk and sound like me is to realize that we need to communicate this problem to people who can solve it. And it is a highly technical problem. It's a legal problem. It's a sociological problem. It's all of them. Yes.
I just want to say I thoroughly enjoyed this and the analogies you used with the vellum and the digital. And one thing that I'm not sure you touched on is the dark ages where people in your family pass before you can get access to their data.
Yeah.
So I retired from IT here at the city recently and
I
started.
saw you nodding, so
Yeah.
you seem to...
You're ringing all my bells.
Okay.
And so one of the things that I am passionate about is keeping people's memories alive.
Yeah.
And so we've got that in common. And stories. And so I just want to make sure people know that there are people and places and or companies like myself that can help you extract data from old devices before it's too late, recommend the best way to protect your data. Make sure if you've got an iPhone, that you assign a legacy contact.
That's right.
Make sure you have their emails and the passwords. Sometimes your loved one will get Alzheimer's and they will accidentally change the password and not remember, and then you're both locked out. I have dealt with lots and lots of really sad cases like that. So take the time, do an inventory of your assets and what to keep, and make sure you have extra copies that are not in the cloud. The cloud is not stable for all of your memories. So if you want any further help, I'm happy to help.
Speak with her after the show.
Do you want to keep going?
Yeah, I'll keep going.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm okay.
This is a little off topic for this evening, but
We didn't cover enough?
no, I just have a question. I can't pass up the opportunity.
Okay.
Because I was literally talking with some people 3 hours ago about whether Shakespeare wrote all the plays. Do
Oh
you
my
believe
gosh.
he did? 3 hours ago.
Did a woman do it?
Did a woman do it?
That's a different talk.
I do
have him
not
back?
stay up late worrying about it. So I think the plays were written by this man from Stratford, who was an actor who went to London. They were written by him. And there is overwhelming documentary evidence to that effect. This is not something that I worry about. If you are interested, all the documents have been imaged, transcribed, and described on a website called Shakespeare Documented, which takes all the surviving documents from the 2 centuries when Shakespeare was alive, from Oxford, from London, from the Folger, puts them all together.
I'm going to ask a question.
Sure.
I'm going
Go
to
for
butt
it.
in. My concern is if we decide what to preserve, it's not going to, some people are only going to want to preserve things that confirm what they think already.
Yes.
And other people are going to want to conserve something else. So how do we...
Well, that's
I mean,
a
that's-
really good question, Josie. But, the fact, we say that history is written by the victors, which is true. The reason why there are professional historians is because even though history is written by the victors, there are traces and clues about what actually happened, and they're in research libraries. And that's why we train historians, because in the end, the historians always win. I mean, if you look at the material long enough with enough people, you can figure out what happened. And that makes me, I am very moved by that, because it means that someone who couldn't say what they knew at the time, what they were thinking can still be available to us. And it's one of the reasons I like Shakespeare. Shakespeare lived in a police state. Elizabeth had her own secret service. You couldn't say what you wanted. You had to pay a fine if you didn't go to church on Sunday. It was a highly regulated society. Playwrights were arrested. Most of them were arrested at least once. But you hear people thinking in his plays. You hear how they think, and you realize, oh my gosh, it was much more complicated. Even when Shakespeare was writing propaganda in his history plays to please the Tudor monarchs, you look inside and you think, oh, no. He knew that there was much more complexity here. And that's the great thing about literature and music and poetry, is I'm going to say it in a computer sciencey way, they are encoding formats that encode a gigantic amount of information, some of which is not intended by the writer. Yeah, absolutely. The humanities were invented by people comparing manuscripts and asking, could this word have meant this in this time? How many other versions of that word can I see? That's it. You tired yet? Yes?
This is just my 1% gesture
Okay.
due to what you've been wonderful tonight. A very dear friend of mine is the head of the Shakespeare Society in New York for the last 30 years and the benefactor.
Okay.
And she just merged it with the Public Theater
Yeah.
of New York.
Yeah.
And I'm going to send Annie a text. And I'm going to tell her all about
Please
you.
do.
And you probably all met each other at the Folger.
I'm
But
sure we've spent.
She's here with us, as is Shakespeare. Thank
Well,
you.
that's great. We'll see. It's a small world. Thank you. Do you have one question over here? Microphone's coming.
Thank you. Sorry.
So here's my question.
Talk in the mic.
Okay.
There you go.
Obama hired a librarian for the Library of Congress to digitize the collection. She's recently been fired. A business person has been put in charge of the Library of Congress. And we all know what Elon Musk did with his group, with being able to go through digitized records. So here's my question. Can the Library of Congress information be altered, filtered,
Okay.
because they can use AI and go through all these digitized records?
Yeah.
There is still the print copy, still.
Right. Not in the
What-
case of the Obama library, because it was born digital. But yes.
I'm talking about the Library of Congress.
Yeah.
So can that be altered? And what's going to happen?
Yeah.
What's going to happen?
Well, Carla Hayden was my colleague. She was the former Librarian of Congress and a truly wonderful librarian and leader of the Library of Congress. We collaborated on different projects. And I'm not going to speak for her, but I think if she were here, she would say that history has always been people fighting over what the words mean. And libraries are full of biased material, altered material. So that's not new. And getting rid of librarians or scholars or people who are telling one version of the story has happened for centuries. With digital information, it is a little bit different. There are ways of hashing or adding cryptographic keys to the original file so that you can see if it's been altered. And until we get quantum computing, those will be pretty good. But, there is a way to do that. But there's no way to ensure that what you're looking at hasn't been tampered with or misrepresented by someone. So the act of faith, when you want to understand the past, is in the balance of opinions of multiple people who've looked at multiple sources. For me, that's where the truth is. And it really doesn't matter what the Librarian of Congress thinks, as long as the material survives. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. What's your joke?